What's up with that?
Oh, there we go. All right, we are live.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Intelligent Disclosure. I'm Richard Dolan, my lovely wife, Tracy.
Hi, everyone.
So we've had a busy week.
Oh,
and
my
it's
gosh.
only Tuesday.
Yeah.
So
it's been absolutely crazy. It feels like the end of the week already.
And it's all live stream. We had Jimmy Church. We did that whole thing here last night.
Mm-hmm.
That was a bit of an extravaganza marathon, kind of fun. Earlier today, I had Joseph Farrell. We had a conversation. All of those were about the Corey Good SSP trademark. I called it a fiasco. I think it is a fiasco. So lots of conversation, and we've actually been following all the comments that many people have been putting in there. You've been following them even more than I have. You've been actually been able to see it.
By the way, I want to say that was a really good interaction or discussion with you and Joe today. That was...
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Joseph is, he came in with a lot of really very on point things to say about that whole thing. And I encourage anyone, if you haven't seen my conversation with Joseph, go check it out. It's on our channel here. It's about an hour, and all of it was, I think, worthwhile. And I'm glad we did that.
Yeah. So
You wanted to mention one other thing.
Yeah, I want to mention one thing. So a very good friend of ours, Carol Dennis, wanted to know why we hadn't spoken about Gaia wanting to trademark the word disclosure.
Right. We're talking about Corey Good trademarking SSP. So why not do equal time to talk about Gaia wanting to trademark disclosure?
Right. So, she was saying, is there something going on? How come no one's bringing this up? And so I think, I just said to her, we covered this in previous episodes. But, maybe a lot of people didn't see that. So we just thought we will just talk about it very, very quickly and not give it a lot of time, because that's not what Richard wants to talk about tonight.
Well, basically, Gaia dropped the whole thing. So they're not trying to trademark disclosure. So essentially, that's over.
Right. Yes, they were. Yes. Going to do that. And they got a big backlash from the community, and they decided to drop it. And we've been able to confirm that from our end. And so that was kind of that.
You can look up in the trademark database as well, and they ended it. They're trying to trademark cosmic disclosure and other show titles that they have. So that's a whole other thing, and people can comment on it as they want to, but they're not commenting on. They're not trademarking disclosure.
But I just want to say, essentially, the exact same thing happened, and they did get a huge backlash from the community, and then they backed down. And so this is the exact same backlash that's happening with trademarking of secret space program. And we were just saying, like, these are generic terms, and it just is not the right thing to do. So unfortunately, the backlash continues until this gets settled, because it's a threat to the whole community. At least that's how we see it. So,
and had Gaia continued with their attempt to trademark disclosure,
the same thing would be happening.
Oh, it would have been that would have been war. And I would have just as much as anyone else been throwing down on that one, without a doubt. So that was clearly not the right thing for them to do, and it was just a good thing for everyone concerned that they decided. Good point. They dropped it. So
yeah. So
there you go.
So that's that. There's nothing conspiratorial about that. That's all it is. So.
Right.
So
we're going to continue
on to the next thing.
We're going to continue a little bit along the themes that we've been hitting last few days. I'm going to talk about what I've occasionally called the New Age Psyop. And I just want to say, I don't believe that all of the New Age movement is a Psyop. And I don't believe that people who hold beliefs and attitudes that I would consider New Age are part of a Psyop necessarily. I think many of them are good friends of mine and of ours, and I love them. And that's not what I'm saying here. But what I am saying is that there have been dangerous elements that New Age philosophy has brought into the UFO phenomenon. And I will also say, and I'll try to make this case tonight, that there are elements of the New Age consciousness movement within the UFO field that look and feel like a psyop. Whether or not I can prove it or we can prove it is another matter. But I think it is fair to treat some of aspects of this as a psychological operation, and I will definitely make my argument for that.
I think no matter what, it's kind of learning, hearing all the information and learning for all of us to become more savvy about the information that we're taking in,
Boy, ain't that the truth? Being savvy, and that's the hardest lesson in life, because we go through life, and it's this long, long process of toughening up our minds and learning. You know, a lot of people talk about discernment. I hear this word all the time, almost so much that it annoys me when I hear it, because like the people who talk about discernment, um, I, from my point of view, are the ones who need the most discernment. But that's just me. But the fact is, we do need discernment. We need but to me, discernment isn't an intellectual, isn't an emotional, heart-centered intuition. No, not really. I mean, a little bit. But discernment really, for me, is an analytical, investigative process. And that's really, I think, what we need more of. And I'm going to be talking about that this evening.
Yes, I loved this lecture. And, you know, because I've been involved in some things too in the past. And I learned a lot from this. So,
well, I'm really glad. And this is a segment, and really, actually, I should say, very adapted from an earlier talk that I developed much earlier this year. So I've adapted it, and I want to present some of it for people tonight.
All right. So shall we get into it?
Let's do it.
All right.
Do you want to hang out here, or do you want to go back over there? If you want to type, this is
all about the typing. I know, but guess what? I have a microphone right here, so no matter what, they're going to hear me type.
So just hang out, stay here with me.
We'll see,
why not? We're going to do this a little differently.
Okay.
So I've got a new camera system as well. I think it's a better visual, a little more clear. I have notes below, so occasionally I'm going to look down, but I'm going to look back up, and we'll just see how that whole thing works. The first thing I want to say, though, is that particularly regarding Western civilization, which these days so many people seem to delight in trashing and talking about how awful it is and how imperialistic it is and how how many evil things it's done. Western civilization has also done something else that personally I consider to be a very great and good thing, which is to promote, after centuries of difficult and often bloody, like literally bloody results, people dying, has been able to lead a fight for rational inquiry, as opposed to domination of societies by religious dogma and by priests and other elites that rule by superstition and rule by means other than rational inquiry. And, to most of us today, it seems like such a basic thing to talk about. Well, yes, of course, we use our reason, we use rationality to understand things, but we have to understand, for nearly all of human history, and I mean nearly all, like 98, 99% of human history and human societies have not had this method of inquiry that has been established. And that is a method of inquiry involving free inquiry by people of the ideas of their society. Think about how incredible that is that we have it. And we've only had it as a result of the bravery of a handful, really, of people, mostly men, but also women, over centuries, who have fought for the right and freedom to express their opinions in an unorthodox manner vis-a-vis the rest of their society. Okay, and that's a gift. That's a gift to all of us, and we should always be grateful for that. That is really the core heritage of what we would call Western civilization. And I'm starting out by talking about this because what I perceive as having happened over the past, let us say, really 50 years, and in a growing kind of crescendo, has been a rejection of that mindset. And part of that rejection of that mindset incorporates or includes what we would call the New Age mentality and the New Age philosophy. I'm going to take a very brief segue and just talk very quickly about a gentleman who's unfortunately deceased, and that's Dave McGowan. Dave McGowan wrote a book and did a study of Laurel Canyon outside of Los Angeles in the mid-1960s on the web. Those articles are out there, and it is called The Strange But Mostly True Story of Laurel Canyon and the Birth of the Hippie Generation. And it's a fascinating study. I highly recommend it. I think McGowan was someone who was able to connect dots in a way that very few people in our society have ever been able to do. And what he did is he looked at the development of the hippie movement out of Laurel Canyon. I mean, that was really the epicenter of it, and saw that a lot of those people who were associated with that right out of the beginning part of that had family connections and deep connections in one way or another with either Navy intelligence or even CIA in ways that were very odd, very strange. The explosion of LSD out of that whole region at that time also seems connected to a U.S. intelligence community. And there's much, much more here. And I know you want me to actually focus on this a little bit more sometime.
Yeah, I hope maybe one night we can do a full show on that, because it
is important.
An incredibly fascinating story.
Yeah, I cannot agree more.
Very mysterious connections, and I love the story. I know a lot of you may be familiar with it, may not, but it's a fascinating one. So
it is indeed, and we will come back to it, I promise. But I'm only mentioning this in passing. Fundamentally, McGowan's thesis, or let's say his very strong suggestion, based on everything he put together, and again, I think this is a good case, is that it's very helpful to look at the countercultural movement of the 1960s, of sex and drugs and rock and roll, basically, as an attempt by the intelligence community to derail the then active peace movement and civil rights movement that was then sweeping across the United States by the mid-1960s. And in the early 60s, those peace activists were not hippies. They were, men and women with ordinary conventional clothing at the time, but they were principled. They weren't on drugs for the most part, and they were active, and they were on their game and very principled. And so that was a threat to this establishment. And in McGowan's thesis, the massive proliferation of drugs. I mean, this was a cultural sea change that happened all across Western society by the late 1960s. Again, it's only through an appreciation of history can we understand just how dramatic those changes were. So that's his point. And so you can see it makes us look with a different perspective, doesn't it, on the 60s. And I probably, like a lot of you, I love a lot of the music of the 60s. I'm a big fan of the Beatles and Jimi Hendrix and the Rolling Stones and CCR and a lot of those other bands. I love them, Janis Joplin. But and it doesn't take away the excellent quality of that music, but it does make us think a little differently about the motivations of what was going on into that culture. The Doors, actually, Jim Morrison appears very prominently in McGowan's analysis. So I'm just going to leave that for now.
His father.
Yes, good call. Jim Morrison's father. Jim Morrison, I mean, I think a lot of people know this, but it's worth reminding, was a U.S. Navy admiral. And he wasn't just any old admiral. He was the admiral who was leading the U.S. fleet at the time in the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964, when during that false flag that, hosed really the whole Western world, and particularly the nation of Vietnam, and led to its virtual destruction. The U.S. dropped more tons of bombs on Vietnam during that war than were dropped by all combatants of the Second World War. I mean, it was an unbelievable devastation of that country. But that was Jim Morrison's dad, and Morrison himself, he's interesting in this whole analysis. And McGowan, again, I highly recommend this. McGowan's book, by the way, is, I think, called Tales from the Canyon, and that's also available, and you can check that out. So with that in mind, let me move on to I'm going to move.
We're definitely coming back to that one in the future. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. But the point, to keep in mind is that U.S. intelligence has sought for many, many years to control or at least steer Western culture. All right, this is really not anything new. I mean, we had the COINTEL program, the operation by the FBI. We all know about this back in the 1950s and 60s. COINTELPRO stands for Counterintelligence Program. J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI ran it, and it was like a full court press against groups that Hoover, in his very, very particular ideological prism saw as a danger. All right, so left of center groups, civil rights groups. Martin Luther King Jr. was someone Hoover had a unending personal hatred for. I mean, Hoover made it his mission to try to destroy Martin Luther King. But what he did with COINTELPRO was to use the FBI to infiltrate these types of groups, Students for Democratic Society, SDS, and other groups, to Black Panthers, another one, to derail them and throw them off their game, and to incite violence within those groups, and to, often in a kind of heavy-handed way, the FBI did this, but they were successful in many ways. So that's COINTELPRO. Then you got CIA cultural manipulation through things like Operation Mockingbird. I've talked about Mockingbird so many times, but it always bears further discussion. Mockingbird was the CIA's successful program to manage American news media, and they had journalists on their payroll spinning news for them for decades. They continue to do this, as does the Pentagon. That's another story. I'll get to that another time, and I've talked about it many times. Then you have the CIA's delving into mind control, explicit mind control. Everyone's heard about MKULTRA, but there were other mind control programs as well. There was Artichoke, there was Bluebird, there was a number of these others. Chatter, which actually was run partly not far from where we're living here. The University of Rochester participated in that back in the 40s and early 50s. So you've got all of these attempts. And then you've got the CIA's infiltration and the intelligence community's infiltration of UFO organizations. I've been talking a lot about that lately as well. All of this is an attempt to manage cultural discourse in one way or another. So now let's look at psi phenomenon and moving in toward New Age culture. Let us not forget that the CIA the United States imported a bunch of Nazis after the end of World War through Project Paperclip. Some of those people were involved in what we would call psi phenomenon, the occult, mind control, occultism, and then moving on to promoting the New Age. One of the interesting things that I've looked at to some extent, and definitely more work needs to be done here, is looking at the Esalen Institute and its relationship as well to the Tavistock Institute. I'll talk a little bit about these, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm the ultimate expert here, but this is something that I'm interested in, and I know that there's a lot of folks out there who've really delved into this a great deal. The Esalen Institute was founded in 1962, so really just a couple of years right on the cusp of the hippie movement and the New Age movement, and it's really one of the foundations for it. They describe themselves as a primary, I'm looking at my notes here, shapeshifter of the culture, generating and promoting new ideas that have transformed our world. That's from their website, by the way. They have been a major driver of the New Age movement, particularly in its early years, bringing in Eastern spirituality, Gestalt psychotherapy, avant-garde psychology, and related types of disciplines, psychedelics, very, very big there, massage, mysticism, and so forth, to raise consciousness, as they say, and to fulfill untapped human potential. Again, part of the human potential movement. That was a phrase coined by one of the Huxley brothers. I think it was Julian Huxley, who was, or maybe Aldous Huxley. Julian Huxley was a member of MI6. Aldous Huxley, of course, was the author of Brave New World. Both of them, as a matter of fact, were very active in the Esalen Institute during the 1960s. Really what you get with the Esalen Institute is they were one of the early active promoters of really crazy hippie culture, psychedelics, mid-60s. It was all there, out of there. But one of the things that they were doing early on were some very unusual and I would say deeply unethical types of experiments involving the use of drugs and psychedelics, and in particular, probably the most egregious one that I've been able to learn about is the use of using schizophrenics to experience psychotic episodes, unmedicated, in order to see if they could raise their IQ. What a weird thing. Now, what this is actually reminiscent of are experiments that were done out of Tavistock. And this is formed in London in 1920 after World War I. Tavistock is also a combination of British military and the British psychological community. But what you're seeing is the studies in human trauma and trauma-based conditioning are all very much related to what happened at Tavistock. And you see this type of thing that was creeping into the Esalen Institute as well. The other thing about Esalen that's just very unusual and interesting to me is that they weren't just New Age hippie generation, psychedelic. They actually were involved behind the scenes in certain types of high-level diplomatic negotiations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. There was actually a newspaper story about this circa 1980, in which the Esalen hot tub experience was designed to bring Soviet and American diplomats in communication with each other. So all I'm saying is that there was some power behind the scenes at the Esalen Institute that could make this type of thing happen. So it's all very interesting. And I don't know to what extent they were, or whether they still are, or whether they ever were as explicit CIA operation. But I do wonder. I wonder very, very much. There's another very interesting early circumstantial, suspicious case of CIA manipulation and introduction of New Age beliefs into our culture. And that's through a very well-known book called The Course in Miracles. This was published in the early 1970s. The author was Helen Schucman. And this was a series of communications that she said she got from Jesus. They were new teachings from the mid-60s up to the early 70s. Now, it was a very successful book and a very important early statement of what we would now call New Age consciousness. Turns out that her employer was a man named Bill Thetford, or William Thetford. And from everything I've learned, he's a very nice guy. Everyone seemed to like him. But he's also was very deeply involved in CIA, MKULTRA, and Project Bluebird, specifically, which was another of the CIA mind control programs that ran from 1951 to 1953. Thetford was involved in that. Following that, he was employed by, at Cornell University, assistant professor of psychology for a couple of years.
Can I just stop you? And can we just say what Project Bluebird was? Just essentially, it was about splitting off personalities. I
thank you for stopping
just
me
want to
on
mention
that. So trauma-based conditioning to split off multiple personalities. Thank you. Sometimes
just
I get off
kind of
my...
is interesting in the whole context. That's all.
Yes, right. And think about how insane that is and how dangerous that is. But this is something that they were deeply involved in working on early 1950s. And yes, Thetford was part of that program. What his exact role was, I don't know, but we know he was part of that. He then worked at Cornell University with another MKUltra related program there for a couple of years. And then through the 1960s, he has received MKUltra funding, or CIA mind control funding, I should say, via the Columbia Presbyterian Hospital for research into personality structures. And that was where he hired Schucman as a psychologist and as his personal assistant. And it was during that period that she began receiving these messages from Jesus that then became the book, A Course in Miracles. Now, I'm not even saying it's an evil book one way or the other. I'm not making a statement on it. But I am saying, well, it's very interesting. Like, that's very interesting. And is there something behind this that we may want to know about, or that we are able to learn about it? And I don't know, but I look at that and I think there's something below the surface here. And we see the CIA's fingerprints. We see MKUltra's fingerprints affecting what became a major part of New Age consciousness in later years. Then you've got the whole CIA involvement in creating cults. All right. So there's the famous example of Jim Jones and the People's Temple of Guyana in South America. And I'll talk a very little bit about this. I've got a book actually on my shelf here, right there. I'll bring it down. Was Jonestown a CIA medical experiment? Okay. The This is by Michael Myers, and it's I don't even know if this was ever published as an actual book. I mean, it's like old-fashioned typeface. It's like a pre-pub copy, but there's this a lot of unusual and suspicious things about this. First of all, Jim Jones takes his group of people. It's called the People's Temple. That's his organization. To this place in South America. The physician that he had down there was from a CIA family. This much is known. The claim in this book, and I don't know if it's been confirmed, is that Jim Jones was in Cuba during the Bay of Pigs operation. So he may have had a connection to that major CIA operation, obviously. He did have tremendous political support in the United States and apparent legal immunity. Like no one was able to touch this guy. At massive expense, he relocates all of the followers of his religious community to Jonestown, this place that's named after him, and he supports them. So he had a lot of financial support. And the other thing is that every day, all the residents in Jonestown were given 2 types of cookies, everyone except for medical staff and except Jim Jones himself. He didn't, but they were given 2 cookies or 2 types of cookies to eat. And the question is, were they drugged? Were these cookies drugged? And I think that would be my guess. So there's that. So in other words, was Jonestown an experiment by the CIA to create a cult in one way or another? There's the organization known as World Vision. They're still around. They're kind of like a Christian nonprofit organization. Back in 1981, their president was a guy who had a pretty famous last name. President of World Vision back in 1981 was a man named John Hinckley, only he was John Hinckley Sr. John Hinckley Jr. in 1981 shot Ronald Reagan, nearly killed him. That's a whole interesting story. And the fact that, Hinckley Jr.'s father position, Hinckley Sr. was actually a really close friend of Vice President George Bush. The Hinckley family, as a matter of fact, were very, very tight with the Bush family. I think around the day that Hinckley shot Reagan, one of Hinckley's brothers had a meeting scheduled with Neil Bush, one of the sons of Vice President Bush and a brother of George W. Bush. So these families were tight. And so you think about it, like George Bush, who would have become president in 1981 had that assassination succeeded, has the son of his very good buddy who's running this very unusual kind of quasi-religious nonprofit organization, and no one in the media touches that story. In fact, Russ Baker, a very prominent mainstream investigative journalist, wrote an article about this himself. When Hinckley Jr. was finally released from custody after many, many, many years, he says, Bush angle to Reagan's shooting still unresolved as Hinckley walks. It was a story that he had to leave out of his book, he said. So anyway, so again, strange connections with the CIA and these odd nonprofits. There's even a possible connection, and I can't say that it's proven one way or another, with the Heaven's Gate cult. Now, this is a direct UFO cult, very like ultra New Age type of belief system involved there. Marshall Applewhite, the leader of it, and 39 members of his cult, including himself and his wife, committed suicide. This is all in Southern California back in 1997. What's less well known about this cult is that they had a web designer, a guy who was running all of their website, and his name was Nick Matsorkas. Nick Matsorkas had a company where he had about a dozen people working for him doing web operations, right? In 1997 especially, that was kind of a big thing. Websites where people didn't know. There wasn't the widespread knowledge like there is today about how to do websites, but this was his job. It was his business. And he had the Heaven's Gate contract. So what's also interesting is that one of his employees was the one who discovered the bodies and that, in fact, that employee was himself a former Heaven's Gate cult member. So I don't really know what that means, except for the fact that Mitsotakis himself then sold all the rights to the Heaven's Gate story and finds himself as a business partner of a fellow by the name of Nicholas Rockefeller in the very short aftermath of all of that. And again, you've got these very odd fingerprints. Of course, the Rockefellers were deeply involved in the creation of the CIA back in the 1940s. And, Rockefeller's lawyer, Alan Dulles, ran the CIA back throughout the entire decade of the 50s. It's just an odd little fingerprint. It doesn't prove that the CIA was involved in creating Heaven's Gate, but again, one wonders. And I think there's probably good research that people have done or can do on it. Let me move on, though, because all of that's circumstantial, and I want to move on to something a little more meaty here. The influence of New Age ideology, particularly in the UFO field, which is where I've been working for all these years. But really, this applies to society in general, in my view. I would say this, within the UFO culture, ufology has always been kind of divided culturally, in a sense, between the nuts and bolts researchers and the contactees. This was the case back in the 50s. And I've talked about this just recently, of the real distinct possibility, and in fact likelihood in some cases, that some of those contactees were themselves intelligence operatives. But those contactees were not the kind of hard, explicit New Age ideology that you get after the 1970s. They were talking about messages of peace, but they were all having physical contact with these other beings. What you get after the 1970s, specifically starting in the 1980s, you get the channeling explosion. Barbara Marciniak, Bringers of the Dawn, she's talking about the Pleiadians. That's the late 1980s. And I think that seemed to signal this sea change in the culture, starting really out of California, but just invading all the rest of the UFO field. Through the 1990s, and certainly into our own century, you start getting a lot of these New Age self-proclaimed prophets and channelers increasingly talking more and more about Pleiadians or Arcturians, and making predictions. It's always with predictions with these people. They constantly are telling us what's going to happen, and they are always wrong. Like, not just a few times, they're wrong every single time. Like, every single time their predictions have been wrong. Ashtar Command, they actually go way back to the 50s, and they've gone through their own very interesting little evolution, of changing predictions. And, the earlier Ashtar Command was like, world's going to end, people, everyone, like, get onto your ship and get out. And they somehow got the idea that was bad, no more fear mongering, it's all going to be sweetness and light. But they've had a series of changing predictions. Through the 1990s, I don't even want to mention all of these people. Why give them the attention? One person in 1996 says, I toured a Syrian mothership, and the world's going to end on December 17th, 1996, with the arrival of 16 million spaceships and a host of angels. Like, yeah, okay, great. People make these predictions. Like, what gives people the idea, seriously, that they can make these predictions? And, like, I guess they'd have to assume that most people would just point and laugh at them. But they invade the field, and I'm sure they're just looking for money in their own way. And they're willing to take the hits to their reputation if they can just get a few dollars. That's what I believe is the case. Then all the predictions for 2000. There were the Project Bluebeam predictions. And of course, the alien invasion that never happened. That Earth's axis would shift. Some people would say, if they were Christian, that the Antichrist was going to be here in 2000. There were like a million predictions about the Earth shifting its axis for year 2000, some by people who are famous in the field to this day. Do the research and figure it out. There are predictions. I guess I will mention Alex Collier only because he made so many. Like how did he just do that? They were all, of course, utterly, completely, laughably wrong. I just collected a few of them because I found him particularly interesting. Early 2000s, he's thrown out the predictions. He says here, there's one. He met with the Andromedans, of course, and he's getting these predictions from them. Between June and October of 2003, there is a strong probability that we will wake up one morning and the moon will no longer be in orbit. There you have it. And I'll just do one other. There's like 6 or 7 here, and I'm just going to leave them. Between 2004 and 2007, all the DNA coding, which involves all of the racial memory of the 22 races, will begin to unlock. A lot of this has to do with the implosion of third density, pulling us up into higher densities. I mean, how do you make any sense out of this stuff? I mean, you couldn't write it, except someone did write it. He wrote it, and there you go, and it's out there. There are many, many others of these, and we're just going to go past them because why waste your time? You get the idea. There's all the disaster predictions. Nancy Leader of Zeta Talk, she's a good one. Back in, I think she was the original predictor of the Nibiru collision series of predictions. I think she might have been the first. She's going back to 2003, talking about Nibiru coming to Earth and creating all that mayhem. On her website, aliens in Zeta Reticuli star system told her through messages via a brain implant of a planet that would enter our solar system and cause a pole shift on Earth that would destroy most of humanity. And that's the whole Nibiru thing. Many, many, many times these predictions have happened. And then you have all the blue beam predictions that happened in 2010 by lots of people. You've got the Comet Elenine prediction of 2011. What a waste of time that was. And then all the Obama disclosure predictions. And these aren't necessarily all new age per se, but I feel that they are related. They are related to it. And I say this because, first of all, a lot of the Obama predictions were made by David Wilcock. All of them were wrong, and very much playing into the new age community, which, really paid a lot of attention to him. He wasn't the only one making the Obama disclosure predictions. I will say that, but he was probably the most prominent one. Obama was going to disclose the truth about UFOs in 2009, in 2010, in 2011, in 2012, in 2013, in 2014, and in 2015. And also in 2016, all according to inside sources, like literally every single year of the Obama presidency. He was going to make a disclosure or rumored to make a disclosure on UFOs. I mean, does this not get embarrassing after a little while? Like, don't people have any sense of being embarrassed at making such predictions that every single year never come true? I don't know. You would think, but this is not a logical world that we live in. And then I can't give this talk without talking about the ascension debacle that just permeated this culture all leading up to 2012. Ascension 2012, Ascension 2012. I remember giving a lecture it was in New Mexico in 2011, early 2011. So it was during the major ramp up of the 2012 Ascension predictions. In fact, I would say middle of 2011 was the real peak of the Ascension predictions, because I think as 2012 approached and as December 2012 approached, I think what I noticed is some of those predictions, the people making the predictions started to think, what if my prediction isn't right? So they started, I think, backing away a little bit. But by mid 2011, this was going full guns. I was at an event in New Mexico, and I mean, the people there, I think I was like the only non-ascension oriented speaker researcher at this thing. And folks there were very nice. Don't get me wrong. They were very wonderful, pleasant people. But I went up on stage and I just said, your DNA is not going to activate, whatever that means. And if it did activate, you probably wouldn't like it, because all of your old DNA from prior eons of evolution, if they activated, you'd look like some kind of hideous connection of Australopithecus, Homo erectus, and whatever you are now. Not fun. But of course, that wasn't the DNA activation theory that the New Age folk were talking about. They're talking about etheric strands of DNA that no one can detect that would activate you and basically make you beyond human. More utopian escapism. And so it was a very, very dangerous kind of philosophy as well. I have one quote here I'm going to read from just one of a countless number of Ascension websites. Just listen to the language here. Planet Earth is shifting from a third dimensional to a fourth and fifth dimensional vibrational frequency. Extraterrestrials, other dimensional beings, angels, spiritual hierarchies, etc., become the catalyst that ushers in the great changes of the new age. What do you say to that? So it's just utopianism, more utopianism, more utopianism. Nothing evidence-based. God forbid any of this stuff is evidence-based. Let me jump right in here to, getting right down to it. Oh, well, actually, no. I want to mention a couple of these other claims that were being said at the time. Because as painful and as cringy as they are, you need to hear this again, even though I thought we were done with that. We're not quite done with it because you got to remember this stuff. Obama was the reincarnation of the god Horus, the Egyptian god Horus. Yeah, that was put out there. Secret bases operated by the black hats were destroyed by the white hats. Remember that one. Now, that's not a New Age thing per se, but again, it's something that permeated that community very, very much so. Claims that Arcturians or Pleiadians support us or are trying to help us. On and on and on and on. And all I have to mention in another talk, the utopian claims of disclosure itself, which is a whole other story right there. All the utopianism. And now, more recently, in the last year or two, you get the claims of, we've heard about the jump rooms and the portals and the time travel and the alleged upcoming announcement of newly excavated ancient high-tech ruins in Antarctica. Remember that one. The announcement of ruins over 1.8 billion years old within the Earth and throughout the solar system. That was supposed to have been announced by now. Remember that one. Aliens with elongated skulls that colonized Antarctica 65,000 years ago. Giant spaceships that crashed in Antarctica. These are part of the culture now that have been permeated, and the opening was made, in my opinion, by New Age ideology. I really feel that way. So basically, the final thing I want to say about this is maybe actually even the most important thing. The reason I think that New Age ideology has been a destructive element in the field of UFO studies and in our culture at large in certain ways is this attitude that comes through again and again. There's certain key things here. Attitude number one is the avoidance of evidence-based reasoning and evidence-based investigation in favor of heart-centeredness. And one hears this quite a lot. Heart over the intellect, intuition over reason. Bad idea, very bad idea. And when we do that, we allow ourselves to be taken in much more easily because we lack that critical acumen and that bullshit detector that you need in life, and that only comes to you. Yes, I mean, part of it is intuition, but that intuition is based on analytical capability that you've got to develop over many, many years. It's not just heart-centered intuition. It doesn't work like that. The other equally dangerous element of the New Age ideology is this avoidance of negativity in their view. Avoid negative thoughts. Because, as they will say, your thoughts create the reality. And there are people, they'll take this idea to such an extreme that the idea is that, well, if you give a bad thing energy in your thinking, you give it more power and it becomes even more dominant. Let me just say that's not true. That's really dangerously not true. All right. And holding to this has caused serious, serious problems. And all that it really does is just creates a mental bubble in which these people will live, and it impedes clarity of thought. Like if you're in a war waged by a very few people who own pretty much all of the valuable things that there are to own in this world, and they just want more and more and more. That's a war, and you are the target of that war. And the best thing for them is to have you not pay attention to what they're doing. The best thing for them is for you to say, I want to avoid negativity in my thinking. I don't want to dwell on that because that's depressing as shit. Let's just think about creating the change we're going to be and being heart-centered and love. And I mean, look, it's important to love other people. It's important to be heart-centered genuinely in your relations with your fellow men and women and children. Yeah, but like, holy smoke, like don't avoid thinking about bad things just because you think you're going to give them energy. Like that's a really, really bad idea. And you're just setting yourself up for being a tool of them by doing that. I mentioned this guy last night when I was talking with Jimmy Church. I'm going to mention him again, Cass Sunstein. And I think he's kind of significant in our contemporary culture in this one way. He's a lawyer. He's a judge. He was very prominent with the Obama administration. He wrote an article, co-wrote an article about 10 years ago called Conspiracy Theories. And he made a very definite recommendation that the government should engage in what he called cognitive infiltration of the groups that produce conspiracy theories. A kind of modern version of COINTELPRO, like a modern reboot of COINTELPRO. And by the way, and I mentioned this as well, I believe, quite recently, Edward Snowden's leaks that he helped to create, that he did create, also confirm this. We know through GCHQ, Britain's version of the NSA, that they actively engage in exactly this type of activity to infiltrate organizations that they consider dangerous through online false flags and a whole lot of other things. So there's all of this cultural, psychological manipulation going on in an attempt to create a compliant culture. And in my view, there's little more that's beneficial for them than to create a kind of quasi feel-good new age ideology that's very much I mean, you don't ever see new age oriented political movements. Like they don't do that. They're not really politically savvy, like ever. And if you're one of those elites, maybe one of those 8,000 bankers that Ronald Bernard talks about, or one of the other elites that's like really actively trying to run the world, you have a long-term global plan, and that global plan would be to transform global economy, global political discourse, global politics, and therefore global culture. And you need to do that to create the world, the transnational global utopia for you that you are envisioning. It's not a utopia for everyone else, but it would be for those elites. And I would say that New Age inspired ideologies are one way that actually is a useful tool for them to achieve that goal. It helps to achieve that goal. When you're looking inward, you're not looking outward. You're not on your game looking at what's happening to you. Just like last night I mentioned the book by John Potash, Drugs as Weapons Against Us. All right. And it's the same thing, because in a society that's intent on getting high, getting wasted, what you're not doing is thinking clearly. What you're not doing is seeing the enemy coming at you in a clear way. And so an ideology that takes us off our game, I could easily see as part of that. So I would say, in that sense, when when someone's stealing your future and trying to steal your wealth, they don't want you to look at them. They want you in your little positive bubble. Just avoid the negativity. Just stay within your ideological bubble. The only way out of this mess, the only way out of the control system that we are living within, and by the way, I want to do another live stream, maybe next week, on what I see as the control system of our society. But the only way out of it is, it's not to deny, incidentally, the importance of consciousness to the UFO phenomenon. I don't want to be misunderstood here. The UFO phenomenon signifies a reality that is very complex and probably much more complex than simple materialistic scientific materialism would indicate. And I'm very much on board with that idea, that it is much more complex than that. So I really want people to understand this. And I also want people who've had bizarre experiences that are not easily explainable to realize that I'm not dismissing that, not dismissing it at all. It's the ideology that I would ask you to rethink. This new age idea, this heart-centered, chakra-driven ideology, I think is a very, very destructive and a destructive ideology, in that it whittles away, it dissolves the true foundation of freedom in our world. And the foundation for freedom in our world is freedom of inquiry, freedom of rational inquiry. Don't ever forget that. Freedom of rational inquiry is the foundation of our freedom. It is the thing that allows people to ask hard questions, to get to the bottom of genuine problems, and to raise issues as a result of hard, rational inquiry. That's how we finally got out from centuries of domination by the church in Western civilization. You know, this is why, you know, the Masons back in the day had to have secret handshakes. Like, if you were someone 500 years ago that didn't believe in theological domination by the church over every aspect of life, then you had to join a secret society or you'd be burned at the stake. Like, literally, you'd be burned alive. Those people had to be very, very careful for many, many centuries. And we're now at a point where we've won that victory, but we are also sliding back in many ways, in ways that are unhealthy for the long-term future of our society. And that includes those of us who are within the UFO community and well beyond into the society in general. So the only way out is, it's not to deny the complexities of consciousness, but it is to recognize BS when it comes our way. That should always be possible for us, and to utilize genuine analytical, critical thinking skills, not just your intuition, however you want to define that. We got to recognize that we are being played every single day in a 24/7 corporate media intelligence community propaganda blitz. Never stops, never stops. All right, and so we've got to be on our game, and that means critical thinking skills. So I guess that's going to be all that I want to say here. Demand evidence. Don't simply accept claims without evidence. This is one of the worst poison pills that we've received from the New Age Psyop. And I mean, whether it is a genuine Psyop or has turned into, or just feels like a Psyop, it almost doesn't matter to me. It acts like a Psyop. And so demand evidence. Don't just accept blindly from the latest guru that comes your way. Done.
All right. Well, I think you have some really great thoughts there. I just want to add a couple things. For one, I want to start by saying, like, we're really putting the term New Age under a big blanket, right? Like, we're really throwing that down, and it really isn't. I mean, that community is really very diverse.